Excellencies, African Ministers of Energy, Excellency Mr. Ernest Moniz, Secretary of Energy for the United States, Excellency Ilham Mohammed Ahmed Ibrahim, African Union Commissioner for Infrastructure and Energy, distinguished delegates from the private sector, academia, and research institutions, ladies and gentlemen. It gives me great pleasure to welcome you all to Addis Ababa, the African political capital, and would like to express my appreciation for your commitment to participate in the US-Africa Energy Summit, which is hosted by the government of Ethiopia and the United States. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, we have long recognized the critical role of energy in improving the well-being of our people. It is a fact that consumption of modern energy services is closely associated with improvements in the quality of lives. It is modern energy services mainly based on fossil fuels which have fueled the industrial revolution and associated human gains in the developed world. It cannot be different for us. We cannot hope to develop without increasing the production and consumption of modern energy services, and there is a direct correlation between economic growth and the production and use of energy services. We in Ethiopia recognize this. Energy is an important input to economic activities in all sectors, be it agriculture, industry, and services. Production and distribution of energy is also an economic activity on its own right. Despite these obvious linkages, access to modern energy services in Africa, except South Africa and some Northern African countries, is lowest in the world. A number of reasons having to do with financial, technical, and institutional capacity can be provided by way of explanation. More than this, however, the biggest stumbling block has been the paralyzing and paternalistic ideology with respect to the role of the state and which had seized many of our development partners. We have seen this firsthand. Until recently, the private sector has not shown much interest to invest in power sector in Africa due to its long return period. We, the African governments, also have not created the necessary environment to ease the risk associated with long-term investment. Our energy policy is informed by our development targets and sectoral policies and strategies. Let me outline here about 4 aspects of our policy. First, we focus on developing our clean and renewable energy resources. This is for 3 principal reasons. To begin with, we have enormous potential in generation of power from water, geothermal, wind, sun, and biomass. Our hydropower potential alone is estimated at 45,000 megawatts. The estimated capacity from the wind resources reaches as much as 1 million megawatts. In addition, an estimated 5,000 to 10,000 megawatts of energy can be produced from our geothermal resources. Our focus on clean and renewable sources is also driven by financial consideration. Few years ago, it was estimated that expenditure on fossil fuel imports represent more than 4% of our GDP. If things continue business as usual, it will come to 7% in a decade and a half. Lastly, there is now a strong agreement that the climate is changing with adverse effects for humans and life in general, that energy sector is responsible for the highest level of annual emissions globally. It follows from this fact that a large part of the solution is found in taking innovative policy and investment measures in the energy sector. Exploiting renewable resources and promoting and supporting renewable and efficient technologies and measures are required to be taken by all nations to meet the challenge of climate change. For countries such as mine, whose contribution to the problem of climate change is insignificant, nothing they do will significantly change the trajectory of the problem. However, we also recognize that reducing emissions from the energy sector epitomizes the conduct of a responsible member of an international community. At this juncture, I would like to thank President Obama for yesterday's announcement on the reduction of emission. Another characteristic of our energy policy is its focus on energy for productive uses. Our lessons that can be learned from past energy interventions is their focus on addressing basic energy services. Do not get me wrong. I am not saying that we should not be bothered with basic energy services. Often, projects have such orientation face sustainability challenges. If, on the other hand, the focus is on providing energy of the quality and quantity needed for productive services, we will be economically empowering households. This will, in the end, also take the good care of energy for basic services. Our belief is that only a focus on energy for productive use is transformational. Third, Ethiopia considers that energy is not just a service, it is a strategic one. Hence, the state has an interest in ensuring that there is adequate, affordable, and reliable supply of energy services. It is true that for the self-financing of the energy sector, prices need to be raised. However, the view of African governments of electricity as a social and development tool rather than an ordinary commercial service should also be given due respect. Fourth, we in Ethiopia consider energy resources as a catalyst for regional integration. In fact, our energy policy is based on production of energy not only for the national consumption, but also for export. We have already started exporting power to Djibouti and Sudan. We have finalized power purchase agreement and started installation of transmission lines to Nairobi, Kenya. Our vision is to reach as far as Yemen and South Africa. It is our view that Africa's energy resources, ranging from water and oil and gas, should bring us together and not feed civil and international conflicts. In all this, the state plays an important role. The state finances and operates large-scale power plants. Of course, public-private partnership programs are seen as an option at this stage. Even if things seem to be changing for better now, there is still large perceived risk associated with long-term private investment in Africa. We have to address this issue during our course of engagement with the private sector. I'm sure in this engagement with the private sector, there will be a clear understanding how to mitigate these risks for the future investment in the energy sector. We are hopeful that there will come a time when the role of the state will be scaled back, when the private sector proves fit for the task. Developmental state has become necessary also because of the strategic importance of energy in general and power in particular. Our competitiveness in the globalized world depends largely on availability of cheap and reliable power, not only for large-scale manufacturing, but also for transporting goods and capital to and from the ports. It is with this in mind that we have been working to increase our power generation capacity to grow from 5-folds in 5 years' time. For accelerated growth in energy sector, we recognize the important role of the private sector that it can play in generating power. For a very long time, we have strong private companies actively producing engineering and construction services to the state in the energy sector. Recently, we have seen an encouraging participation of private sector in the actual generation of power from defined sources. We signed an agreement to host our first single largest foreign direct investment for production of power from geothermal resources, which amounts $4 billion US. With respect to the private sector, the state plays an important role of providing legislative and regulatory frameworks, facilitating for the smooth functioning of the private sector. At this point, I'd like to highlight the importance of taking energy efficiency measures as critical as production. Researchers indicate that significant portions of projected new demand in energy can be met by taking energy efficiency measures. That's why we are undertaking institutional and policy reforms. For instance, the national regulatory called the Electric Agency is recently upgraded to Energy Authority with expanded mandates, including that of regulating and promoting energy efficiency measures and investment. Innovative technologies and their discoveries obviously will support our effort to efficiently using our energy resources. For Africa to be the next global growth pole, we need to scale up our investment in the production and consumption of energy services. It is against this background that we see Power Africa initiative of President Obama as a step in the right direction. The government of the United States and that of Africa, together with most of our development partners represented here today, recently initiated a long-term high-level dialogue in the energy sector, specifically targeting energy sector financing, restructuring, efficiency, expansion, access, climate change issues, and capital buildup. This dialogue builds on the present US-Africa cooperation framework in the energy sector under the umbrella of Power Africa initiative. It's also consistent with Africa's vision for integrated infrastructure and the recent program for infrastructure development, PIDA, as mentioned by the Commissioner. At this juncture, I would like to thank the Secretary of Energy for the United States for the announcement made today, which obviously will elevate our energy development capacity. I fully agree that this dialogue will promote US-Africa public and private sector partnership and will open the gateway for exploring the opportunities available in Africa's energy market. I wish to express my appreciation for the organizers for all efforts and dedication that went into this. I wish you a fruitful dialogue and networking, and I declare that this summit is open. I thank you for your kind attention.
My remarks, and to begin with, the time is right. African growth is, economic growth, of course, is to facilitate rising incomes. The folks address the energy issues that are on the table, and along with the renewable development as needs for energy in the future. Most expectations are that the world will need something like 35 to 40% more energy 20 years from now, 35 to 40%, and Africa will be an important part of meeting that answer. And it was very interesting to just hear the Prime Minister describe how Ethiopia is going to be an exporter not only continental of electricity, but also we need to face. For 10 years, people have talked about a super cycle in commodities. The notion that the money is so much about investing in new capacity, but there's much now about redoing their asset base, is selling assets. In this room, the cost of LNG in some cases have tripled over the last last 10 years. So managing those costs, the changing nature of global markets, and the growth of oil production in the United States since 19... the big question is that kind of tight oil development available in Africa? So the prospects, there are some prospects in Central and West Africa, but they do not appear to be that great. In terms of shale gas, the gas discoveries in Africa, the gas development in the United States, and other gas developments tell you that we're going to have a much larger global LNG market, but the are, of course, how to manage the resource opportunities that are the role of the state and the role of the private sector, but he also made the point that the private sector has to be able to retain in terms of where to put your money. So I think one of the messages I'd like to leave, sure their positions, in the next 10 years, if we don't have this kind of jobs, but what the resource does in terms of time, money flowing in, and again, a very good example, I think that's an issue that many decision makers will struggle with. Obviously, the sense of stability of terms is very important for investors. That you have to think in the whole chain of the system. That is, from the wellhead and the natural together. And finally, I think in all of that, of course, and this is the issue for the ministers who are here, is management. I would like now to invite Mr. Niango Gabi from the African Union to take the lectern and with his remarks.
Mon nom est Bernard. Vous avez une description sommaire dans les brochures. Le programme de des instituts